The roaring waters of the Snake River swallowed Rosalyn Miller's screams as the current dragged her beneath the surface yet again. Spring of 1875 had brought heavy rains to Wyoming territory, transforming the normally placid waterway into a raging torrent. Her lungs burned for air, skirts heavy as lead weights pulling her down into the murky depths. Just when blackness began creeping into the edges of her vision, strong hands gripped her waist, yanking her toward the surface with desperate force. Rosalyn gasped as her head broke through the water, coughing violently as her rescuer fought against the current, one arm locked around her waist while the other clawed toward the riverbank. Through water-blurred vision, she caught glimpses of a sunburned face, dark hair plastered to his forehead, and eyes narrowed with determination. "Hold on," he shouted over the rushing water. "I got you." The man, a stranger, dragged her toward the shore with powerful strokes, fighting the river's pull with every ounce of his strength. When they finally reached the muddy bank, he heaved her onto solid ground before collapsing beside her. Rosalyn rolled onto her side, retching river water, her entire body trembling with cold and shock. "You're all right now," the man said between labored breaths. "You're safe." When Rosalyn finally caught her breath enough to look at her rescuer, she found herself staring into the weathered face of a cowboy. His dark hair curled damply against his neck, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. His clothes, denim trousers, a sodden cotton shirt, and a leather vest clung to his powerful frame. "Thank you," she managed, her voice a ragged whisper. "I thought I was going to die." The cowboy pushed himself to his knees, concern etched across his features. "Can you stand, miss?" Rosalyn attempted to rise, but her legs betrayed her, buckling beneath her weight. Pain shot through her ankle and she collapsed with a cry. "Whoa there," the cowboy said, catching her before she hit the ground. "Looks like you might have hurt yourself. I'm Quinn Blackwood. What's your name, miss?" "Rosalyn Miller," she replied, teeth chattering. "I was crossing at the ford. My horse spooked at something. Next thing I knew, I was in the water." Quinn frowned, glancing around the empty riverbank. "No sign of your horse. Must have bolted." He studied her trembling form. "We need to get you warm and dry. My camp's not far from here. Can I take you there?" Rosalyn hesitated. A proper lady would never accompany a strange man to his camp unchaperoned. But with night approaching, her soaked clothing clinging to her body and no horse to carry her to town, she had little choice. "Yes," she nodded. "Please." Quinn Blackwood lifted her carefully, one arm beneath her knees and the other supporting her back. Despite his own sodden state, his body radiated warmth against her shivering form. "Hold tight," he instructed, beginning the trek away from the river. "Town's too far to reach before dark, especially with you injured. But I've got a fire going at my camp and some dry blankets." Rosalyn closed her eyes, too exhausted to worry about propriety. The steady rhythm of Quinn's heartbeat against her ear lulled her into a state between wakefulness and sleep. By the time they reached his campsite, a small clearing sheltered by cottonwood trees, the sun had begun its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Quinn's camp was simple but well organized. A small tent, a campfire ringed with stones, and a few supplies neatly arranged nearby. A dappled gray horse was tethered at the edge of the clearing, raising its head curiously as they approached. "That's Smoke," Quinn explained as he gently set Rosalyn down on a bedroll near the fire. "Best horse a man could ask for." Quinn stoked the fire, adding more wood until it blazed high and bright. From his saddlebags, he retrieved a wool blanket which he handed to Rosalyn. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, then quickly added, "I'll turn my back. Wrap yourself in this blanket. I've got some coffee brewing and a bit of stew left from earlier." True to his word, Quinn turned away, busying himself with the coffee pot while Rosalyn struggled out of her sodden dress. Her fingers were numb and clumsy, making the task difficult, but eventually she managed to strip down to her chemise. She hesitated, knowing even that undergarment was soaked through, but the chill that had settled into her bones made the decision for her. She removed the wet garment and quickly wrapped the blanket around herself. "I'm decent," she called softly. Quinn turned, carrying a tin cup of steaming coffee which he handed to her. "Drink this. It'll warm you from the inside." The coffee was strong and bitter, but the heat of it spread through her body like a blessing. Quinn hung her wet clothing on branches near the fire to dry, then settled across from her, studying her with concern in his dark eyes. "Your ankle's swelling," he observed. "Mind if I take a look?" Rosalyn nodded, extending her leg cautiously. Quinn's hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined her ankle, his touch professional rather than forward. "Not broken, I don't think," he concluded. "But a bad sprain. You won't be walking far for a few days." The reality of her situation crashed over Rosalyn like another wave. She was miles from town, injured with no horse, no proper clothing, and in the company of a man she'd just met. Her father would be frantic with worry when she didn't return home. "My father," she said suddenly. "He'll be looking for me. Where are you staying?" Quinn asked, handing her a plate of stew. "Clearwater. My father's the new doctor there. We arrived from Philadelphia just last month." Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "Clearwater's about 15 miles east of here. Too far to travel tonight, especially with your ankle. First thing tomorrow, I'll ride into town and let your father know where you are." "You do that?" Rosalyn asked, surprised by his offer. "Of course," Quinn replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Can't have him thinking the worst happened to you." As they ate, Quinn told her he was a cattle driver, working for the Broken Spur Ranch. He'd been on his way back from delivering a small herd to a buyer when he'd heard her cries for help. "Lucky for me you were passing by," Rosalyn said softly. Quinn's expression grew serious. "Lucky for both of us. I don't like to think what might have happened if I'd been a few minutes later." As night fell completely, the temperature dropped rapidly. Despite the fire and blanket, Rosalyn couldn't stop shivering. Quinn noticed and frowned. "You need to get warmer," he said. "The tent's small, but it'll keep the wind off. You take it. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "No," Rosalyn protested. "I can't take your tent. You're already soaked because of me." Quinn's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I've slept in worse conditions, Miss Miller." "A little dampness won't kill me." "Rosalyn," she corrected him. "After fishing me from the river, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." His smile widened, transforming his face. "Rosalyn, then, and I'm Quinn." With his help, Rosalyn hobbled to the tent. It was indeed small, barely large enough for one person to stretch out, but it offered protection from the night air. Quinn provided her with another blanket and his spare shirt, clean but well worn, for her to sleep in. "If you need anything in the night, just call out," he told her. "I'm a light sleeper." Alone in the tent, Rosalyn changed into Quinn's shirt, which hung almost to her knees. The fabric carried his scent: leather, wood smoke, and something uniquely him. She lay down on the bedroll, listening to the sounds of Quinn moving around the campfire, tending to his horse, and finally settling down for the night. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Each time she closed her eyes, she felt the river's current dragging her under again. After an hour of restless tossing, she heard Quinn's voice from outside. "Still awake?" he called softly. "Yes," she admitted. "I keep feeling the water." There was a pause, then the sound of movement. "That happens sometimes after a close call. Your mind keeps reliving it. Does it go away?" "Eventually," he said. "Would it help if I talked for a while? Might take your mind off things." "Please," she replied, grateful for the distraction. And so Quinn began to speak, his deep voice carrying easily through the canvas. He told her stories of cattle drives and life on the open range, of the stars and how to navigate by them, of the beauty of Wyoming's mountains and plains. His voice was soothing, and eventually, Rosalyn drifted into sleep, the river's pull finally relinquishing its hold on her mind. Morning arrived with the cheerful songs of meadowlarks. Rosalyn awoke, disoriented, momentarily confused by her surroundings until the events of the previous day came rushing back. Her ankle throbbed dully, and every muscle in her body ached from her battle with the river. Outside, she could hear Quinn moving about the camp, the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifting through the tent flap. Gingerly, she sat up, testing her ankle. The swelling had worsened overnight, and even the slightest pressure sent pain shooting up her leg. "Quinn," she called. He appeared at the tent entrance immediately. "Morning, how's the ankle?" "Not good," she admitted. "I don't think I can put any weight on it." Quinn nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I figured as much. I've made breakfast, then I'll head to Clearwater to find your father." He helped her from the tent, supporting most of her weight as she hopped awkwardly to sit by the fire. In the morning light, she could see him clearly for the first time. Quinn Blackwood was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with intelligent dark eyes and strong features. His hair, dry now, curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Thank you for the use of your shirt," she said, suddenly aware of her state of undress beneath the blanket she kept wrapped around herself. Quinn handed her a plate of bacon and hardtack. "It suits you better than me," he said with a small smile. After breakfast, Quinn checked her ankle again, wrapping it carefully with strips torn from one of his spare shirts. "Keep it elevated as much as you can," he instructed. "I'll be back by midday with your father if all goes well." He packed a few supplies, saddled Smoke, and prepared to leave. Before mounting, he hesitated, glancing back at Rosalyn. "Will you be all right alone?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Rosalyn nodded, though the prospect of being alone in the wilderness made her nervous. "I'll be fine. Please hurry back." Quinn mounted Smoke with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "There's water in the canteen and some jerky in my saddlebag if you get hungry. Keep the fire going. It'll keep wild animals away." With a final nod, he rode off, quickly disappearing among the trees. Rosalyn stared after him, suddenly feeling very small and vulnerable in the vast Wyoming landscape. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Rosalyn managed to hobble around the camp, gathering more firewood from the nearby area and keeping the flames fed. Her dress and undergarments had dried overnight, though they were wrinkled and stained from the river. Still, she was reluctant to change out of Quinn's shirt, finding comfort in its soft familiarity. As the sun climbed higher, Rosalyn's thoughts turned to her rescuer. There was something about Quinn Blackwood that intrigued her, a quiet strength and unassuming kindness that set him apart from the other men she'd met since coming west. In Philadelphia, her father's position as a respected physician had introduced her to many refined gentlemen, but none had possessed Quinn's straightforward decency. Midday came and went with no sign of Quinn or her father. Rosalyn tried to quell her growing anxiety, telling herself that the journey to Clearwater and back would naturally take time. But as afternoon waned toward evening, worry gnawed at her. What if Quinn had encountered trouble? What if her father wasn't in town? What if Quinn had simply abandoned her? No, she dismissed the last thought immediately. She might not know him well, but she knew enough to be certain Quinn Blackwood was not the sort of man to leave a woman stranded and injured in the wilderness. Just as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Rosalyn heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Relief flooded through her, and she attempted to stand, leaning heavily on a branch she'd been using as a makeshift crutch. But it wasn't Quinn who rode into the clearing. Instead, three rough-looking men on horseback emerged from the trees, their expressions shifting from surprise to predatory interest when they spotted her. "Well, well," the lead rider said, a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes. "What have we here? A little lady all alone in the woods." Fear seized Rosalyn's heart. She gripped her branch tighter, knowing it would provide little protection but unwilling to appear completely defenseless. "I'm not alone," she lied, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "My companion will return any moment." The scarred man exchanged amused glances with his companions. "Is that so? Funny, we've been riding these parts all day and ain't seen nobody else." He dismounted, taking a step toward her. "What's your name, pretty thing?" Rosalyn raised her branch. "Stay back, I'm warning you." The man laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down her spine. "She's warning us, boys. Ain't that sweet?" He took another step forward. "Now put down that stick before you hurt yourself." The sound of a rifle being cocked froze everyone in place. "She asked you to stay back," Quinn's voice rang out from the edge of the clearing. He sat atop smoke, rifle aimed steadily at the scarred man's chest. Beside him, mounted on a chestnut mare, was an older gentleman with silver-streaked hair and a black doctor's bag strapped to his saddle, her father. "Papa!" Rosalyn cried, relief washing over her. The scarred man raised his hand slowly. "No need for that, mister. We was just checking if the lady needed help." "She doesn't," Quinn replied coldly. "Now mount up and ride out, don't look back." For a tense moment, Rosalyn feared the men might resist, but self-preservation won out. They mounted their horses and departed, casting dark glances over their shoulders. As soon as they were gone, Dr. Joseph Miller dismounted and rushed to his daughter, embracing her tightly. "Rosalyn, thank God you're safe. When your horse returned without you yesterday, I feared the worst." "I'm all right, Papa," she assured him, clinging to him. "Thanks to Mr. Blackwood, he saved me from the river." Her father turned to Quinn, who had dismounted and was watching their reunion with a small smile. "Mr. Blackwood, I cannot thank you enough. You've returned my daughter to me." Quinn nodded, suddenly seeming uncomfortable with the praise. "Any man would have done the same, Dr. Miller." "Not any man would have pulled her from that river, tended her injuries, and then ridden 15 miles to find her father," Dr. Miller countered. "You're a good man, Mr. Blackwood." Quinn's eyes met Rosalyn's briefly before he looked away. "We should pack up camp. It'll be dark soon, and it's not safe to travel these parts at night, especially with those three still in the area." Dr. Miller agreed, and Quinn efficiently began breaking down his camp. Rosalyn's father examined her ankle, confirming Quinn's assessment that it was badly sprained but not broken. "You'll need to stay off it for at least a week," he told her. "And even then, you'll need to be careful for some time after." As Quinn loaded his belongings onto Smoke, Dr. Miller approached him. "Mr. Blackwood, I insist you return with us to Clearwater. You must allow me to repay your kindness with proper hospitality." Quinn hesitated. "That's generous of you, Doctor, but I should be getting back to the Broken Spur. They'll be expecting me." "Surely a few more days won't matter," Rosalyn interjected. "Please, Quinn, we would feel better knowing you were safely in town after those men." Something in her expression seemed to sway him. "All right," he conceded. "For a day or two." The journey to Clearwater was slow and careful, with Rosalyn riding double with her father while Quinn led the way, alert for any sign of the three strangers. By the time they reached town, night had fallen completely, and the streets were quiet except for the muted sounds spilling from the saloon. The Miller home sat on the eastern edge of town, a modest but comfortable two-story house with a small medical office attached to one side. As they approached, lights glowed warmly in the windows, and the front door flew open to reveal Mrs. Margaret Miller, Rosalyn's mother, her face a picture of anxious relief. "Rosalyn," she cried, rushing down the porch steps. "Oh, my darling girl!" Once the initial flurry of reunion had passed, and Rosalyn had been settled in the parlor with her ankle elevated, proper introductions were made. Quinn stood awkwardly in the Millers' well-appointed home, hat in hand, looking distinctly out of place among the Eastern furnishings. "Mr. Blackwood, we are forever in your debt," Mrs. Miller said, clasping his hand between both of hers. "You must stay with us. I insist." "Madam, that's very kind, but no arguments," Dr. Miller interrupted. "We have a spare room, and it's the least we can offer. Besides, it's far too late to find other accommodations in town." Outnumbered, Quinn acquiesced with a small nod. "Thank you." After a hot meal which Quinn devoured with the appetite of a man who'd been living on trail rations for too long, Mrs. Miller showed him to the guest room. Rosalyn, watching him climb the stairs with her mother, felt a strange reluctance to see him go. In just over 24 hours, this stranger had become someone whose presence brought her comfort and security. "He seems a good sort," her father commented, noticing her gaze. "He is," Rosalyn agreed softly. "I owe him my life." Dr. Miller studied his daughter's face thoughtfully. "Well, he's welcome to stay as long as he wishes. Now let's get you upstairs. You need rest." That night, in her own bed for the first time in 2 nights, Rosalyn found sleep elusive once again. But this time, it wasn't memories of the river that kept her awake. Instead, her thoughts were filled with a pair of dark eyes and the gentle hands that had pulled her from the water and tended her wounds with such care. Morning brought the sounds of town awakening, wagons rattling down the main street, shopkeepers opening their establishments, the distant lowing of cattle from the stockyards. Rosalyn dressed with difficulty, struggling to manage with her injured ankle, but determined to join the family for breakfast. When she finally made her way downstairs, leaning heavily on the banister, she found Quinn already at the breakfast table with her parents. He'd clearly made use of a razor, his face now smooth, and his hair was neatly combed. He wore the same clothes as the day before, but they had been brushed clean, and he'd rolled his shirt sleeves to his elbows, revealing sun-bronzed forearms. He stood when she entered, pulling out a chair for her. "Good morning. How's the ankle today?" "Better, thank you," she replied, though in truth, it still throbbed painfully. Breakfast was a lively affair, with Dr. Miller peppering Quinn with questions about his work and life. Quinn answered politely but briefly, revealing little about himself beyond the basics. He was 31, had been working cattle since he was 16, and had no family to speak of. He'd been with the Broken Spur for 3 years, finding the work steady and the boss fair. "And before that, Dr. Miller inquired, Quinn's expression closed slightly. "Moved around, took work where I could find it." Sensing his reluctance to elaborate, Rosalyn changed the subject. "How long will you stay in Clearwater, Quinn?" "Not long," he replied. "I should check in with the ranch, let them know I delivered the cattle, but I thought I might stay a few days, make sure you're recovering well." The idea of Quinn remaining in town lifted Rosalyn's spirits immeasurably. "I'd like that." Mrs. Miller smiled approvingly. "Excellent. Joseph, perhaps you could take Mr. Blackwood to Finch's store today. He'll need a change of clothes if he's to stay with us." Despite Quinn's protests that his trail clothes were sufficient, Dr. Miller insisted on accompanying him to the general store to purchase new attire. "Consider it part of our thanks," he said firmly. No arguments. Left alone with her mother, Rosalyn braced herself for questions. She didn't have to wait long. He seems quite taken with you, Mrs. Miller observed, clearing the breakfast dishes. Mama, please, he saved my life. That's all. Her mother smiled knowingly. I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching, and I've seen how you look at him. Rosalyn felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's only been 2 days. Sometimes that's all it takes, Mrs. Miller replied softly. I knew your father was the one within an hour of meeting him. Before Rosalyn could formulate a response, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Miller went to answer it, returning moments later with Sheriff Thomas Gable. Miss Miller, the sheriff greeted her, removing his hat. Glad to see you're safe. Your father told me about your accident yesterday when he was searching for you. Thank you, Sheriff, Rosalyn replied. I was fortunate that Mr. Blackwood was nearby. Yes, about Mr. Blackwood, the sheriff said, his expression growing serious. I'd like to ask him a few questions. Is he here? He's out with my husband at present, Mrs. Miller answered. Is there a problem, Sheriff? Sheriff Gable shifted uncomfortably. Just routine, madam. When strangers come to town, I like to know who they are. Something in his tone suggested there was more to it than that. But before Rosalyn could press him, the front door opened, and Quinn and her father returned, carrying several packages. The sheriff's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Mr. Blackwood, I presume. Quinn set down his packages, studying the lawman with a neutral expression. That's right. Sheriff Thomas Gable, the lawman introduced himself. Mind if I have a word with you outside? A flicker of wariness crossed Quinn's face, but he nodded. Of course. The two men stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind them. Immediately, Rosalyn hobbled to the window, ignoring her mother's disapproving look. Outside, the sheriff and Quinn stood facing each other, their conversation inaudible through the glass. The sheriff's expression was stern as he spoke, occasionally gesturing with one hand. Quinn listened impassively, his back straight, hands hanging loose at his sides. After several minutes, he nodded and said something that appeared to satisfy the sheriff. They shook hands, and the lawman departed. When Quinn returned inside, all three Millers looked at him expectantly. Is everything all right? Dr. Miller asked. Quinn nodded, though Rosalyn noticed a new tension in his shoulders. Fine. Sheriff was just curious about those 3 men we encountered yesterday. Seems they might be connected to some cattle rustling in the area. It was a plausible explanation, but Rosalyn wasn't entirely convinced it was the whole truth. Still, she didn't press the matter, not wanting to appear nosy or distrustful after all Quinn had done for her. The next few days fell into a pleasant routine. Quinn helped Dr. Miller around the house and yard, fixing the loose porch step, mending the garden fence, and chopping enough firewood to last a month. In the evenings, he joined the family in the parlor, listening to Dr. Miller read from the newspaper or participating in card games that Mrs. Miller organized. Rosalyn's ankle improved gradually, allowing her to move about the house with the aid of a cane her father provided. Quinn was often at her side, ready to offer an arm for support or retrieve things she couldn't easily reach. His constant presence and attentiveness ignited gossip among the townspeople, many of whom stopped by the Miller home with transparent excuses, clearly hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious cowboy who had saved Dr. Miller's daughter. For his part, Quinn seemed oblivious to the attention, or perhaps simply uninterested in it. He was unfailingly polite to visitors but retreated whenever possible, preferring the company of the Millers to that of curious strangers. One evening, about a week after her rescue, Rosalyn found Quinn alone on the back porch, staring up at the star-filled sky. She quietly joined him, leaning against the railing beside him. "Beautiful night," she commented. Quinn nodded. One thing I love about the open country, you can see every star God put in the heavens." They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments before Rosalyn gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since the sheriff's visit. "Quinn, why did Sheriff Gable really want to speak with you that day?" Quinn's shoulders tensed slightly, but he didn't look at her. "Told you about those men." "I don't believe that's all it was," Rosalyn said gently. "You can trust me, you know." He was quiet for so long that Rosalyn thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed, his breath forming a small cloud in the cool evening air. "Sheriff recognized my name," he admitted. "Blackwood isn't exactly common. He wanted to know if I was related to the Blackwood brothers from Kansas." "And are you?" Quinn nodded slowly. "My older brothers, Daniel and James. They rode with Quantrill during the war, then turned to outlawing after. Robbed banks, stagecoaches. They were killed resisting arrest 6 years ago." Rosalyn absorbed this information, studying Quinn's profile in the dim light spilling from the kitchen window. "But you didn't ride with them." "No," Quinn said firmly. "Never. But when your family name becomes synonymous with outlaws, people tend to make assumptions. It's why I've kept moving, never staying in one place too long. Easier than explaining." Rosalyn placed her hand lightly on his arm. "Thank you for telling me." Quinn finally turned to look at her, his expression vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Your family's been good to me. Better than I deserve. I don't want my name to bring trouble to your door." "Is that why you've been talking about leaving?" Rosalyn asked, heart sinking at the thought. "Partly," he admitted. "I also need to check in at the ranch, been gone longer than I planned. Will you come back?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, revealing more of her feelings than she'd intended. Quinn's gaze softened. "Would you want me to?" "Yes," Rosalyn answered without hesitation. "Very much." Something shifted in Quinn's expression, hope mingled with uncertainty. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he raised one hand to her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "Rosalyn," he murmured, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. The back door opened suddenly, spilling more light onto the porch. Quinn dropped his hand as Mrs. Miller appeared. "There you two are," she said cheerfully, either not noticing or choosing to ignore the moment she had interrupted. "Joseph's about to read from Mr. Dickens' latest. Won't you join us?" "Of course, Mama," Rosalyn replied, her cheeks warm. "We'll be right in." As her mother returned inside, Quinn offered Rosalyn his arm. "Shall we?" The moment had passed, but something had undeniably changed between them. As they joined her parents in the parlor, Rosalyn felt a new awareness of Quinn beside her, the warmth of his body, the subtle scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the way his hand briefly covered hers as he helped her to her seat. That night, Rosalyn lay awake long after the household had gone quiet, replaying the moment on the porch in her mind. What would have happened if her mother hadn't interrupted? Would Quinn have kissed her? Would she have let him? The answer, she knew with absolute certainty, was yes. The next morning, Quinn announced at breakfast that he needed to return to the Broken Spur Ranch the following day. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough," he told the Millers, "and I need to let my boss know what happened." "You're welcome to stay longer," Dr. Miller assured him. "You've been a tremendous help around the place." "Thank you, sir, but I should go," Quinn replied. "I'll head out first thing tomorrow." Rosalyn felt a pang of disappointment, though she'd known this moment was coming. Quinn had responsibilities, a job to return to. She couldn't expect him to remain in Clearwater indefinitely, no matter how much she might wish it. After breakfast, Quinn borrowed Dr. Miller's horse and rode out to the Broken Spur, promising to return by evening. Rosalyn spent the day restlessly moving about the house, her improved ankle allowing her greater mobility but still requiring caution. "You're going to wear a path in the carpet," Mrs. Miller commented as Rosalyn passed through the parlor for the third time in an hour. "Sorry, Mama, I'm just restless." Her mother set aside her sewing. "He'll be back, you know." "I don't know what you mean," Rosalyn replied unconvincingly. Mrs. Miller smiled knowingly. "Mr. Blackwood, he'll return to Clearwater. A man doesn't look at a woman the way he looks at you and simply ride away forever." "Mama!" Rosalyn exclaimed, flushing. "Oh, don't play coy with me, young lady. I've seen how it is between you two, and I approve for what it's worth. He's a good man, honorable, hard-working, and clearly devoted to you." Rosalyn sank into a chair opposite her mother. "Even with his family history." Mrs. Miller's eyebrows rose. "So he told you about his brothers. Good. No secrets between you then." "You knew." "Your father mentioned it after speaking with Sheriff Gable. The important thing is that Quinn chose a different path from his brothers. That speaks to his character." Rosalyn nodded, grateful for her mother's understanding. "I care for him, Mama, more than I should after knowing him such a short time." "The heart knows what it wants," Mrs. Miller said simply, "and sometimes it knows quickly." Quinn returned as promised that evening, looking tired but satisfied. Over dinner, he explained that his boss at the Broken Spur had been understanding about his extended absence, especially given the circumstances. "He's even offered me a new position," Quinn told them. "Foreman of their new operation closer to town. Previous man quit unexpectedly." "That's wonderful news," Dr. Miller said. "Congratulations." "It would mean settling in one place," Quinn continued, his eyes finding Rosalyn's across the table. "Having a home, not just a bunk in the ranch house." The implication of his words wasn't lost on Rosalyn. This new position would keep Quinn in the area, close to Clearwater, close to her. "Have you accepted?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Told him I'd think on it," Quinn replied. "Wanted to discuss it with friends first." After dinner, as had become their custom, Quinn and Rosalyn stepped onto the back porch for a few moments of privacy before joining her parents in the parlor. The night was clear and cool, with a quarter moon hanging above the silhouettes of distant mountains. "This foreman position," Rosalyn began, "it sounds like a good opportunity." Quinn nodded, leaning against the porch railing. "It is. Better pay, more responsibility, my own cabin on the property." "Will you take it?" He turned to face her, his expression serious. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether I have a reason to stay in these parts." Rosalyn's heart quickened. "What kind of reason would you need?" Quinn took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Rosalyn, I know we haven't known each other long, just over a week. But in that time, I've come to care for you more than I thought possible." "Quinn, please let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not a wealthy man. I don't have much to offer except hard work and dedication. But if you'd allow me to court you properly, I'd consider it the greatest honor of my life." Joy bubbled up inside Rosalyn, making her feel lighter than air. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Quinn's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, erasing the worried lines and making him look younger, almost boyish in his happiness. Slowly, he reached for her hands, enfolding them in his own. "May I?" he asked softly, his gaze dropping to her lips. In answer, Rosalyn rose on tiptoe, wincing slightly as she put pressure on her healing ankle. Quinn noticed immediately, his hands moving to her waist to steady her. "Careful," he murmured, then bent his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, but it sent warmth spreading through Rosalyn's entire body. When they finally parted, both were breathing a little faster, and Quinn's eyes had darkened with emotion. "I should speak with your father," he said, his voice slightly rough. Rosalyn nodded, too overwhelmed for words. Together they returned inside where Dr. and Mrs. Miller were engaged in a game of checkers. "Papa," Rosalyn said, gathering her courage, "Quinn would like to speak with you." Dr. Miller looked up, taking in their linked hands and flushed faces. A small smile played at his lips. Would he indeed? "Very well, Mr. Blackwood. Shall we step into my study?" The two men left the room, and Rosalyn collapsed into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. Mrs. Miller abandoned the checkerboard to sit beside her daughter, patting her hand affectionately. "I take it congratulations are in order?" she asked. "He wants to court me," Rosalyn confirmed, unable to keep the smile from her face. "And he's considering taking that foreman position to stay near Clearwater." "Excellent news on both counts," Mrs. Miller declared. "Though I suspect your father will insist on a proper engagement period. He's traditional that way." "I don't mind," Rosalyn replied truthfully. "I want to do things properly." The men returned after about 20 minutes, both looking pleased. Dr. Miller crossed to his wife and daughter, bending to kiss Rosalyn's forehead. "Mr. Blackwood has asked my permission to court you," he said. "I've given it, with the understanding that you'll both observe the proprieties. No more unchaperoned moments on the back porch." Rosalyn blushed but nodded. "Yes, Papa." "And he's accepted the foreman position at the Broken Spur's new operation," Dr. Miller continued. "He'll be living about 5 miles outside of town, close enough for regular visits but not so close as to cause gossip." Quinn approached, standing somewhat awkwardly beside Dr. Miller. "I'll be riding out tomorrow to get settled at the new place, but I'd like to call on you Sunday if that's acceptable." "Very acceptable," Rosalyn replied, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. The courtship of Quinn Blackwood and Rosalyn Miller became the talk of Clearwater over the following weeks. Every Sunday, Quinn would arrive at the Miller home dressed in his best clothes, often bearing small gifts, wildflowers he'd picked along the way, a book of poetry he'd found at the general store, once even a delicate silver hair comb that must have cost him a week's wages. They were never alone, of course. Either Dr. or Mrs. Miller was always present, maintaining a discreet distance but ensuring propriety was observed. Still, these Sunday visits became the highlight of Rosalyn's week, each one strengthening the bond between them. As spring gave way to summer, Rosalyn's ankle healed completely, allowing her to accompany Quinn on walks through town under her mother's watchful eye. They strolled along Clearwater's Main Street, visited the small church where services were held each Sunday, and occasionally stopped at the town's only restaurant for tea and cake. During these outings, Rosalyn learned more about Quinn's past. His childhood in Kansas, the loss of his parents to influenza when he was 14, his brother's descent into outlawry after the war, and his determination to forge a different path for himself. "I worked honest jobs," he told her as they sat on a bench outside the general store one warm June afternoon, Mrs. Miller browsing inside. "Ranch work mostly. Kept to myself, stayed out of trouble. When I heard my brothers had been killed, I mourned them, but I wasn't surprised. They'd chosen a path that could only end one way." "It must have been difficult," Rosalyn said softly. "Being judged for their actions." Quinn shrugged. "People fear what they don't understand, and the Blackwood name carried weight in certain parts. It's why I kept moving." "Easier than explaining I wasn't that kind of Blackwood." "But you're staying now," Rosalyn pointed out, "despite the risk of your name being recognized." Quinn's gaze softened as he looked at her. "Some things are worth the risk." By August, Quinn had established himself as a respected figure in the community. His competent management of the Broken Spur's new operation had impressed his employers, and his quiet dignity had won over many of the initially suspicious townspeople. Even Sheriff Gable had warmed to him, occasionally stopping by the ranch to share coffee and conversation. On a particularly beautiful Sunday in late summer, Quinn arrived at the Miller home earlier than usual, a nervous energy about him that Rosalyn noticed immediately. "Is everything all right?" she asked as they settled in the parlor, Mrs. Miller taking up her usual position by the window with her sewing. "Everything's fine," Quinn assured her, though he seemed unable to sit still, fidgeting with his hat in a way most unlike his usual composed manner. "Better than fine, actually. I've been saving and, well, I've made some improvements to the cabin on the ranch property." "Oh," Rosalyn prompted when he fell silent. "Added a proper bedroom, expanded the kitchen, built a front porch." He cleared his throat. "It's still simple, but it's comfortable now, a real home." Understanding dawned on Rosalyn. "It sounds lovely." Quinn glanced toward Mrs. Miller, who was pretending not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. "I was hoping you might come see it. You and your parents, of course. Perhaps next Sunday." "I'd like that very much," Rosalyn replied, her heart quickening. She suspected this invitation was a prelude to something more significant. Her suspicion proved correct the following Sunday when the Miller family visited Quinn's cabin at the Broken Spur's new operation. The small dwelling had indeed been transformed. Fresh paint brightened the exterior, curtains hung at the windows, and a sturdy porch with a swing completed the picture of domestic tranquility. Inside, the cabin was simple but immaculately clean, with a few touches of braided rug before the fireplace, framed landscapes on the walls that made it feel like a home rather than merely a place to sleep. Quinn gave them a tour, clearly proud of the improvements he'd made with his own hands. After showing them around, Quinn suggested a walk to see the rest of the property. Mrs. Miller complained of a slight headache and elected to remain in the cabin. Dr. Miller, after a meaningful look from his wife, declared he would stay to keep her company. "Don't wander too far," he told Quinn and Rosalyn, "and stay within sight of the cabin." They strolled toward a stand of cottonwood trees not far from the house, stopping beside a small stream that cut across the property. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground with patterns of light and shadow. "It's beautiful here," Rosalyn said, lifting her face to the warm breeze. "I thought so too the first time I saw it," Quinn replied. He hesitated, then took her hands in his. "Rosalyn, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes." Quinn drew a deep breath, then sank to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I know I'm not the sort of man your parents might have imagined for you back in Philadelphia. I'm just a cowboy with a complicated past and simple dreams. But I love you with everything I am, and I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Rosalyn Miller, will you marry me?" Tears of joy filled Rosalyn's eyes. "Yes, Quinn. Yes, I'll marry you." Quinn's face broke into a radiant smile. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch, opening it to reveal a slender gold band set with a single modest diamond. "It's not much," he said apologetically as he slipped it onto her finger. "But I saved every penny." Rosalyn silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect, just like you." When they returned to the cabin, hand in hand, Rosalyn's ring catching the sunlight, her parents were waiting on the porch. One look at their faces told the Millers all they needed to know. "I take it congratulations are in order," Dr. Miller said, his eyes twinkling. "She said yes," Quinn confirmed, his voice filled with wonder as if he still couldn't quite believe it himself. Mrs. Miller embraced them both, tears in her eyes. "I'm so happy for you both." "When shall we have the wedding?" "October," Rosalyn replied without hesitation. "When the leaves have turned and the air is crisp. We could have the ceremony at the church in town and perhaps the celebration afterward here at the cabin." Quinn squeezed her hand. "Whatever you want." I just want you to be my wife." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. Mrs. Miller and Rosalyn worked tirelessly on Rosalyn's wedding dress, a creation of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Quinn, with help from some of the ranch hands, expanded the cabin's porch to accommodate the wedding celebration. Word of the engagement spread quickly through Clearwater, and the Millers' home was soon inundated with visitors offering congratulations and, in some cases, barely concealed curiosity about the cowboy who had won the doctor's daughter's heart. "They're just jealous, Mrs. Miller assured Rosalyn after one particularly transparent visit from the banker's wife. "You've secured the most eligible bachelor in the county, even if they didn't recognize it until now." October arrived with a spectacular display of autumn colors. The cottonwoods turned golden, the maples blazed red, and the air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. On the morning of the wedding, Rosalyn awoke to clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for the day she would become Mrs. Quinn Blackwood. As her mother helped her dress, pinning the delicate veil to her upswept hair, Rosalyn found herself thinking of the day Quinn had pulled her from the river. How close she had come to drowning, how fortunate she was that he had been passing by at that exact moment. "What are you thinking about, dear?" Mrs. Miller asked, noting her daughter's reflective expression. "Just that life can change in an instant," Rosalyn replied. "If Quinn hadn't heard my cries that day—" "But he did," her mother said firmly. "And here you are, about to marry a man who loves you deeply. Focus on that blessing, not on what might have been." The small church in Clearwater was filled to capacity for the ceremony. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the marriage of Dr. Miller's daughter to the Broken Spurs foreman. Quinn, standing at the altar in a new suit, looked both nervous and impossibly handsome. When Rosalyn appeared at the church door on her father's arm, a collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the congregation. But Rosalyn had eyes only for Quinn, whose face transformed with such love and wonder that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the minister asked as they reached the altar. "Her mother and I do, Dr. Miller replied, placing Rosalyn's hand in Quinn's before stepping back to join his wife. The ceremony was simple but moving. When Quinn spoke his vows, his voice was clear and steady, his eyes never leaving Rosalyn's face. When it came time for Rosalyn to speak, her voice trembled slightly with emotion, but her words were heartfelt and true. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Quinn's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a seal on their vows and a preview of the life they would share. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, the church erupted in applause. The celebration at Quinn's cabin, their cabin, now lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by nearly everyone in town. A local fiddler provided music, and as the sun began to set, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" Quinn asked as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "Completely," Rosalyn replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he assured her. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find this was all a dream, that I never heard your cries that day by the river." "It's no dream," she said, lifting her face for his kiss. "This is real. We're real." As the celebration continued around them, Rosalyn found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the terror of nearly drowning to the joy of finding love in the most unexpected place. Quinn had pulled her from the river that day, but in many ways, he had also saved her from a life half-lived, a life without the kind of deep, abiding love they now shared. As the last guests departed, calling final congratulations, Quinn swept Rosalyn into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home. The cabin, illuminated only by the fireplace and a few strategically placed candles, looked warm and inviting. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," Quinn said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "Home," Rosalyn repeated, savoring the word. "Our home." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Quinn's arms wrapped protectively around her. Rosalyn knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The river that had nearly claimed her life had instead led her to a love deeper and truer than she had ever imagined possible. Spring of 1876 brought new beginnings to the Blackwood homestead. The harsh Wyoming winter had given way to gentle breezes and wildflowers dotting the prairie. Rosalyn stood on the front porch, watching as Quinn rode in from checking the northern pasture. 6 months of marriage had only deepened her love for him, each day bringing new discoveries about the man she had married. Quinn dismounted with his usual grace, patting Smoke's neck before securing the horse to the hitching post. When he caught sight of Rosalyn waiting for him, his face broke into the smile that still made her heart flutter. "There's my beautiful wife," he called, striding toward the porch. "How are you feeling today?" Rosalyn placed a hand on her slightly rounded abdomen where their first child grew. "Better. The morning sickness seems to be easing." Quinn climbed the steps and gathered her in his arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good. I've been worried about you." "No need," she assured him. "Your son or daughter is strong, just like their father." Quinn's hand joined hers on her stomach, his expression one of wonder. They had discovered the pregnancy 2 months earlier, and Quinn had been alternating between overwhelming joy and nervous anticipation ever since. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed, not for the first time. "A home, a family, a wife who loves me. Sometimes I still can't believe it's real." Rosalyn rose on tiptoe to kiss him. "Believe it. This is our life, Quinn Blackwood, and it's only just beginning." As they stood together on the porch of the home they'd built, watching the sun sink toward the distant mountains, Rosalyn thought about the fateful day Quinn had pulled her from the river current. He had saved her life that day, but more importantly, he had stayed until she could stand again, and then had chosen to stand beside her for the rest of their lives. The river that had nearly claimed her had instead carried her to the greatest joy she had ever known. And as their child grew within her, Rosalyn knew that the current of their love would carry them forward together through whatever the future might hold. "I love you, Quinn Blackwood," she whispered, leaning into the strength of his embrace. "And I love you, Rosalyn Blackwood," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "More than life itself." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, two souls bound by love and destiny, watching as the first stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky, a testament to the enduring power of a chance encounter by a river's edge, and the remarkable journey that had brought them home to each other's hearts. 5 years passed like a dream for the Blackwoods. Their cabin had expanded into a proper ranch house as their family grew. First came William Joseph, named for Quinn's father and Rosalyn's, a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's thoughtful nature. 2 years later, they welcomed Emma Margaret, a spirited girl who had Quinn wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she first gazed up at him with Rosalyn's blue eyes. The Broken Spur had prospered under Quinn's management, and last year, when the owner decided to retire to California, he had offered Quinn the opportunity to buy the operation. With savings and a loan from the bank, readily granted now that Quinn Blackwood was a respected member of the community, They had become landowners, rechristening the property the River Bend Ranch. On a warm June afternoon in 1880, the Blackwood family gathered on their front porch to celebrate Quinn and Rosalyn's 5th wedding anniversary. Dr. and Mrs. Miller had joined them, now regular visitors who delighted in their grandchildren's antics. "Papa, tell the river story," 5-year-old William demanded, climbing onto Quinn's lap. Quinn exchanged a smile with Rosalyn. The tale of how they met had become a favorite bedtime story for their children, though Quinn always kept the more frightening details to a minimum. "Well," Quinn began, settling his son more comfortably against his chest, "I was riding along the Snake River one spring day when I heard a cry for help, and there was your mama caught in the current. And you jumped right in to save her," Emma added excitedly from her place on Rosalyn's lap. "That's right," Quinn confirmed. "I couldn't let such a pretty lady wash away, could I? And then you fell in love and got married and had us." William concluded triumphantly. The adults laughed at the simplified version of events. "That's the short version," Quinn agreed, his eyes meeting Rosalyn's over their children's heads. The look they shared held all the unspoken details of their journey, the challenges they'd overcome, the love that had grown between them, the life they'd built together. "Dinner's almost ready, Mrs. Miller announced, rising from her rocking chair. "Come help me set the table, children." As the grandparents herded the excited children inside, Quinn moved to sit beside Rosalyn on the porch swing, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. 5 years, he mused, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I pulled you from that river. Other times, it's as if I've loved you my entire life." Rosalyn leaned into him, her hand finding his. "I think perhaps I was always making my way toward you, even before we met. Every step I took led me to that river, to that moment." Quinn's fingers tightened around hers. "I thank God every day for leading me to that riverbank at exactly the right time." "As do I," Rosalyn agreed softly. She hesitated, then added, "I have something to tell you." Quinn turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised. "Oh." Rosalyn took his hand and placed it on her stomach, still flat but harboring their newest secret. "We're going to need another bedroom by winter." Joy bloomed across Quinn's face, followed quickly by concern. "Are you feeling all right? You need to rest more. I can take on more of the household duties." Rosalind silenced him with a kiss. "I'm perfectly well. Dr. Anderson confirmed it yesterday. He says I'm as healthy as a horse." Quinn gathered her in his arms, his embrace gentle despite his obvious excitement. "Another child," he whispered against her hair. "Another blessing." From inside the house came the sounds of their family children's laughter, Mrs. Miller's gentle admonishments, Dr. Miller's deep chuckle. The life they had built together surrounded them like a warm embrace. "We should join them," Rosalyn said, though she made no move to leave the comfort of Quinn's arms. "In a minute," Quinn replied, tilting her face up for another kiss. "I just want to hold my wife a little longer and count my blessings." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Quinn and Rosalyn Blackwood sat together on the porch of the home they had created, bound by a love born in the desperate moments of a river rescue and nurtured through years of joy and challenge. The river that had nearly claimed Rosalyn's life had instead given her a new one, a life filled with love, family, and the steadfast devotion of the cowboy, who had not only pulled her from the current, but had stayed until she could stand again, and then had chosen to stand beside her for all the days that followed. Their story, like the river itself, continued to flow, carrying them forward into a future bright with promise and rich with love, a testament to the enduring power of courage, compassion, and the unexpected ways in which destinies intertwine along life's winding course. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges to the Blackwood family. Their third child, James Thomas, was born healthy and strong in the winter of 1881, completing their family. As the children grew, so did the River Bend Ranch, becoming one of the most prosperous operations in the territory. Quinn had proven himself not just a skilled foreman but a natural businessman with an instinct for breeding quality stock. The Blackwood brand became known throughout Wyoming and beyond for its exceptional cattle and fair dealings. Rosalyn, meanwhile, had established a small school on their property, teaching not only their own children but those of their ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. By 1890, 15 years after Quinn had pulled Rosalyn from the river, the Wyoming Territory was preparing for statehood. The wild frontier was gradually giving way to civilization, though the spirit of independence and resilience that had defined the West remained strong in its people. On a crisp autumn day, much like the one on which they had married, Quinn and Rosalyn rode together across their land, enjoying a rare moment alone while their children were engaged in their studies. "Remember when all this was just a small cabin and a dream?" Quinn asked as they paused atop a ridge overlooking their sprawling ranch. Rosalyn smiled, the years having added character to her beauty rather than diminishing it. "I remember thinking that cabin was the most perfect home I could imagine, because you were in it." Quinn reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. At 46, his dark hair was now threaded with silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from years of squinting into the sun. To Rosalyn, he had never been more handsome. "I've been thinking," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice that reminded her of the day he'd proposed. William's nearly 16 now, old enough to take on more responsibility at the ranch. And with James turning 9 this winter and Emma 14, maybe it's time you and I took a trip. "A trip?" Rosalyn echoed, surprised. In 15 years of marriage, they had rarely ventured beyond the nearest large town, too busy building their ranch and raising their family. Quinn nodded. "I thought maybe we could visit Philadelphia, see where you grew up. Your father mentioned your cousin's still there. And then, perhaps, we could see some other places you've always wanted to visit." Tears pricked at Rosalyn's eyes. She had occasionally mentioned missing certain aspects of her childhood home, particularly the cultural offerings that were still limited in Wyoming. That Quinn had not only remembered but had been planning a way to fulfill this unspoken wish touched her deeply. "I would love that," she said softly. Quinn's face lit up with the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "Then it's settled. We'll go in the spring, after the calving season. William can manage things here with the foreman's help, and your parents can keep an eye on the younger children." They rode back to the ranch house in companionable silence, each lost in thoughts of the journey to come. As they approached the sprawling structure that had grown from Quinn's simple cabin, Rosalyn was struck by how far they had come from that desperate day by the river. The main house now boasted 6 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen where they gathered for family meals, and a large parlor where Rosalyn taught music to their children and any other youngsters who wished to learn. Behind the house stood the schoolroom Quinn had built for her 3 years earlier, a testament to his support for her passion for education. Beyond the house stretched the barns, corrals, and bunkhouses needed to support their thriving operation. Nearly 30 men worked for the River Bend Ranch now, many with families who lived in small but comfortable houses Quinn had built on the property. What had begun as a chance encounter by a raging river had blossomed into not just a love story, but a legacy, a family and a community built on the foundation of Quinn and Rosalyn's enduring bond. That evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, Quinn pulled Rosalyn close against his side. "You ever wonder what might have happened if I hadn't been riding by the river that day?" he asked quietly. Rosalyn shook her head. "No. I believe we were meant to find each other, one way or another. If not by the river, then somewhere else, somehow." Quinn pressed a kiss to her temple. "I like to think so too, but I'm mighty glad it happened the way it did, even if it nearly stopped my heart to see you in that current." "It brought us here," Rosalyn said simply, gesturing to encompass their home, their land, the life they'd created together. As if on cue, the front door opened and their children spilled out onto the porch. William, tall and lanky like his father, carried a checkerboard. Emma, growing more beautiful by the day, had her sketchbook in hand. Young James, a bundle of energy even after a full day of lessons and chores, clutched a book of adventure stories he'd been begging someone to read to him. "Papa, will you play checkers with me?" William asked. "I've been practicing, and I think I can beat you this time. Miss Harrison says my drawings are good enough to send to that art school in Denver," Emma announced, referring to the young woman who came twice a month to teach advanced subjects in Rosalyn's school. "Mama, can we read another chapter tonight?" James pleaded, climbing onto Rosalyn's lap despite being far too big for such childish behavior. Quinn and Rosalyn exchanged a glance over their children's heads, a look filled with contentment and shared joy. This was the life they had built together, not perfect, certainly not always easy, but rich beyond measure in the things that truly mattered. "I'll play checkers after we read James's chapter," Quinn promised, ruffling his youngest son's hair. "And Emma, let me see those drawings. If Miss Harrison thinks they're good enough for Denver, they must be something special." As the family settled into their evening routine, Rosalyn felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. For the river that had brought Quinn into her life. For his strong arms that had pulled her from the current. For his steadfast heart that had stayed until she could stand again, and then had chosen to build a life standing beside her. "I love you," she whispered to him as the children bickered good-naturedly over whose activity should come first. Quinn's eyes met hers, still filled with the same devotion she'd seen in them by the river all those years ago. "And I love you, Rosalyn Blackwood, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." In that moment, surrounded by the family they had created together, Rosalyn knew that the current that had once threatened to take her life had instead carried her to her greatest blessing, a love that, like the rivers of Wyoming, ran deep, powerful, and true. The spring of 1891 brought Wyoming's first year as an official state, and the Blackwoods' long-anticipated journey east. True to their plan, Quinn and Rosalyn boarded the Union Pacific in Cheyenne, bound for Chicago and then on to Philadelphia. It was Rosalyn's first time on a train, and Quinn's first journey further east than Denver. "It's strange to think we'll see the Atlantic Ocean in just a few days," Rosalyn marveled as they watched the Wyoming landscape roll past their window. "When I was a girl in Philadelphia, the idea of seeing the Pacific seemed like an impossible dream." Quinn squeezed her hand. "Perhaps we'll make it to California someday too, see both oceans in one lifetime." The journey east was a revelation for both of them. Quinn, who had spent his entire life in the open spaces of the West, marveled at the increasing density of cities and towns as they traveled eastward. Rosalyn, returning to the world of her childhood after 16 years in Wyoming, saw the East with new eyes, appreciating its beauty while no longer feeling that it was truly home. Philadelphia welcomed them with a burst of spring blooms and the bustle of a great city. Rosalyn's cousin, Elizabeth, had arranged accommodations for them and served as their guide, showing Quinn the historic sites and cultural attractions that had been part of Rosalyn's upbringing. "It's beautiful," Quinn acknowledged as they stood before Independence Hall. "But I must admit, it makes me appreciate our wide open spaces all the more." Rosalyn smiled, understanding completely. "I feel the same way. Philadelphia will always be where I grew up, but Wyoming is home now." They spent 3 weeks exploring the East Coast, visiting Washington, D.C., New York City, and even venturing as far north as Boston. Quinn, initially uncomfortable amid the crowds and formality of Eastern society, gradually relaxed as he discovered that people everywhere responded to his natural dignity and straightforward manner. In New York, they attended the opera, Quinn sitting stiffly in the formal attire Elizabeth had insisted was necessary for such an occasion. But as the music swelled and the story unfolded on stage, Rosalyn saw her husband's expression transform from polite endurance to genuine appreciation. "I never imagined such music existed," he confessed later in their hotel room. "It was like hearing the voice of God." Rosalyn kissed him tenderly. "That's why I wanted you to experience it. Some things can't be described, only felt." As they prepared to return west, Rosalyn realized that the journey had deepened their connection in unexpected ways. Seeing Quinn experience her childhood world had given her a new perspective on the man she had married, his adaptability, his willingness to embrace new experiences, his unfailing consideration for her happiness. And she had gained a deeper appreciation for the life they had built together in Wyoming. The East Coast held beauty and culture that she had missed, but the freedom and possibility of their Western home had become essential to who she was now. Their return to the River Bend Ranch was joyous, their children running to meet the wagon that brought them from town, their employees gathering to welcome them home. The sight of the ranch house, solid and welcoming against the backdrop of the mountains, filled Rosalyn with contentment. That night, after the children had finally gone to bed, full of stories and small gifts from their parents' journey, Quinn and Rosalyn sat on their porch in the gathering darkness. "Thank you for taking me east," Rosalyn said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It was a wonderful gift." "I'm glad we went," Quinn replied, "but I'm even gladder to be home." Rosalyn smiled, understanding the sentiment perfectly. "So am I." Quinn was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about something. That school in Denver that's interested in Emma's art. Perhaps we should consider letting her attend when she's a bit older." And William mentioned he might like to study modern farming techniques at that new agricultural college in Fort Collins. Surprised, Rosalyn turned to look at him. "You'd consider sending them away to school?" Quinn nodded slowly. "Our journey made me realize something. We've given our children roots here at River Bend, but we should also give them wings. The chance to see more of the world, to follow their own dreams, even if those dreams take them away from the ranch for a time." Tears pricked at Rosalyn's eyes. This was why she loved this man, his capacity for growth, his willingness to put his children's futures above his own desires to keep them close. "I think that's wise," she agreed softly, "though I'll miss them terribly." Quinn's arm tightened around her. "We'll still have each other. And James still has many years at home before we need to worry about him flying the nest." The thought of their children growing up and finding their own paths was bittersweet, but Rosalyn knew it was the natural order of things. She and Quinn had raised them to be strong, independent individuals, just as they themselves had been when they met by the river all those years ago. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own joys and sorrows. William, at 20, chose to attend the agricultural college in Fort Collins, returning to River Bend with new ideas that helped the ranch flourish even more. Emma, at 18, was accepted to the art school in Denver, her talent blossoming under professional instruction. Young James, now 13, showed a keen interest in medicine, often accompanying Dr. Miller on his rounds when the elderly physician visited from town. In 1898, as the nation turned its attention to the conflict with Spain, Quinn and Rosalyn celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. "You remember what you thought when you first saw me?" Rosalyn asked, pouring more wine into Quinn's glass. Quinn chuckled. "Honestly, my first thought was this lady is going to drown if I don't move fast." Rosalyn laughed. "And after you pulled me out," Quinn's expression softened with memory, "I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, even soaking wet and half drowned. And I thought I was the luckiest man alive to have been in the right place at the right time." "I thought you were an angel," Rosalyn admitted. "Then I realized you were very much a man, and I was very glad of it." Quinn took her hand, his thumb caressing the wedding band he had placed there 23 years earlier. 23 years, he mused, "and I still wake up every morning grateful that you're beside me." "As do I," Rosalyn replied softly. They sat in companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Their hands remained linked, the connection between them as strong as it had been on the day Quinn had pulled her from the river's current. Life had not always been easy. They had weathered droughts and blizzards, cattle sickness and market downturns. They had mourned the passing of Dr. Miller 3 years earlier and were now supporting Mrs. Miller in her grief. They had faced the challenges of raising 3 strong-willed children, and the bittersweet pride of watching them begin to make their own way in the world. But through it all, their love had remained constant, a shelter in hard times, a source of joy in good ones. The cowboy who had pulled her from the river had indeed stayed until she could stand again, and then had stood beside her through all the years that followed. As twilight deepened into night, Quinn rose and offered his hand to his wife. "Shall we go in, Mrs. Blackwood?" Rosalyn placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Lead the way, Mr. Blackwood." Together they walked into the home they had built, their steps in perfect harmony after 23 years of walking life's path side by side. The river that had brought them together continued to flow, just as their love continued to sustain them, carrying them forward into whatever the future might hold. And in that moment, as in so many before it, Rosalyn knew with absolute certainty that being swept away by that river current had been not a tragedy narrowly averted, but the greatest blessing of her life, for it had carried her straight into the arms of Quinn Blackwood, the man who had not only saved her life, but had given it meaning beyond anything she could have imagined. The turn of the century brought new changes to the Blackwood family and the River Bend Ranch. William had returned from college and married Sarah, a schoolteacher from Fort Collins, bringing fresh energy and ideas to the family operation. Emma had established herself as a respected artist in Denver, her landscapes of the Wyoming wilderness hanging in galleries alongside works by more established painters. James, now 20, had followed in his grandfather's footsteps and was studying medicine at a university in Chicago. Quinn and Rosalyn, in their 50s now but still vigorous, had gradually turned over more of the day-to-day management of the ranch to William and Sarah, though Quinn remained actively involved in major decisions. This arrangement gave them more time to enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor, time to ride together across the land they loved, to visit Emma in Denver or James in Chicago, and to dote on William and Sarah's young twins, Quinn Jr. and Rose. On a warm summer evening in 1905, 30 years after their first meeting, Quinn and Rosalyn sat on the bank of the Snake River, not far from the spot where he had pulled her from the current so long ago. A picnic basket lay beside them, the remains of their supper packed away. Quinn's arm was around Rosalyn's shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him as they watched the water flow past. "It seems so peaceful now," Rosalyn observed. "Hard to believe it nearly took my life." Quinn pressed a kiss to her temple, where strands of silver now mingled with the auburn. "Nature's like that, beautiful and dangerous at once." Rosalyn turned to look at her husband. At 56, Quinn's face was deeply lined from years in the sun and wind, his once dark hair now more silver than black. But his eyes remained the same dark, warm, and filled with the steadfast love that had been her anchor for 3 decades. "You ever wonder what might have happened if we'd met some other way?" she asked. "In town, perhaps, or at a social gathering?" Quinn considered the question thoughtfully. "I might not have had the courage to approach you in a social setting," he admitted. "A Philadelphia doctor's daughter would have seemed far above a cowboy with a questionable family name. But the river didn't care about any of that. It just threw us together." "And I'm so glad it did," Rosalyn said softly. Quinn's expression grew serious. "There's something I've never told you about that day." Surprised, Rosalyn sat up straighter. "What is it?" "I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that part of the river," Quinn explained. "I was taking a shortcut back to the ranch after delivering those cattle. The regular trail was 5 miles east, but something told me to go that way that day. Call it instinct or divine intervention or just dumb luck, but I've always believed I was meant to be there, meant to find you." Tears welled in Rosalyn's eyes. "I believe that too, that we were destined to find each other one way or another." Quinn brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. 30 years, he marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we've always been together." "In all the ways that matter, we have," Rosalyn replied. "My heart recognized yours long before my mind caught up." They fell silent, watching as the setting sun cast long shadows across the water. A family of deer emerged cautiously from the trees on the opposite bank, making their way to the river to drink. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily on thermal currents, its silhouette sharp against the golden sky. "Wyoming's changed so much since we met," Quinn observed. Automobiles on the streets of Cheyenne, telephone lines stretching across the prairie, electric lights in the bigger towns. "But this," Rosalyn gestured to the river, the mountains beyond, the wild beauty surrounding them, "this remains the same. This is still our Wyoming." Quinn nodded, his eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "Our home." As twilight descended, they packed up their picnic and mounted their horses for the ride back to River Bend. The ranch was visible from miles away now, its buildings forming a substantial compound that housed not just their family, but a community of workers and their families. What had begun as Quinn's simple cabin had grown into a thriving enterprise that employed dozens and produced some of the finest cattle in the state. But for Quinn and Rosalyn, its greatest value lay not in its economic success, but in the life they had built there together, the children they had raised, the love they had nurtured, the memories they had created within its boundaries. As they approached the main house, they could see William on the porch with his twin 5-year-olds, reading them a story before bedtime. Sarah waved from the doorway, her belly rounded with their 3rd child due in the autumn. The scene filled Rosalyn's heart with contentment, the continuation of their legacy, the future secured. That night, as they prepared for bed in the master bedroom that had been theirs for decades, Quinn took Rosalyn in his arms, holding her close. 30 years ago, I pulled you from that river," he said softly. "Best thing I ever did." Rosalyn smiled up at him, her hands resting on his chest where his heart beat steady and true. "And you stayed until I could stand again." "And then some," Quinn added with a smile, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "And I intend to keep staying for as many years as the good Lord grants us." "I'm counting on that, Quinn Blackwood," Rosalyn replied, returning his kiss with one of her own. "I'm counting on that." As they settled into bed, Quinn's arm wrapped protectively around her as it had been every night for 30 years. Rosalyn reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a desperate struggle in a raging river. How fortunate she had been that day not just to survive, but to find the love that would define her life, the partner who would walk beside her through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. The cowboy who had pulled her from the river had given her far more than her life that day. He had given her a love story that had unfolded over decades, a family that had grown and flourished, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And as sleep claimed them, the river of their shared life continued to flow, carrying them forward together into whatever adventures awaited in the years to come.